There we go. Okay, so welcome. My name is Gina Alexandris. I am a longtime legal educator, former lawyer, career counselor, career coach, and a really big advocate for internationally trained lawyers and internationally trained law students. I'm really glad that you're able to join us. I'm recognizing that we have about an hour together, and there's a lot to cover, but I wanted to be able to share some information with all of you. One of the things that I find, two of the things that I find that internationally trained lawyers and internationally educated students, law students, oftentimes do not have enough of is number one, information, and number two, a community. And that's why I do these webinars from time to time to help on both those fronts. One, to help build a community so you don't feel like you're alone going through this process. And two, to be able to give you information that you may or may not otherwise have known about. So I'm glad that you're excited that you're joining us. I'm very excited to start this process with you. What I wanted to talk about this afternoon for the next hour includes learning the 3 L's of the process. So learning your local legal landscape. That's number one. Number two, I wanted to talk about a little bit about preparing yourself and understanding you and some of your written tools. We're not going to get into tremendous detail about resumes. I'll leave that for another time, or interviews, but understanding and getting your mind wrapped around what those are like. I think we want to start with the beginning initially and move into the next stage as we move forward. To start, what I'd really appreciate if each of you could do is answer the following couple of questions. So first of all, if you could let us know where you're watching from, what city are you joining us from today? And as part of that, if you could also indicate what stage of the process are you in? Are you still a law student somewhere? Are you in the application process for the NCA? Have you completed the accreditation and you're off to licensing? Just so we get a chance. So if you can please join the chat and indicate some of that information, it would give me a little bit of support in terms of knowing who I'm speaking with and who I'm engaging with. And it would also help your fellow colleagues understand where others are coming from, and just to see the various processes that people participate in. So as I'm speaking, I'll also be adding people as they join in. We're going to try and end at 1 if it's 1:05 or 1:10. If you have to go, please feel free to do so. I want to try and respect everybody's times as much as possible. So in the chat, which is at the bottom of your screen, please feel free to tell us where are you watching this from and what stage of the process are you in. As we're doing that, what I will also remind us is that there are a couple of things that I tend to expect from people when we're in a webinar. The first is respect for each other. We're all in a learning phase, and I expect that there is respect for each other and for our ideas and our questions and our comments that we provide. And also, yes, this is being recorded, but confidentiality. So it is going to be something that's available afterwards as an information piece. So be mindful of confidentiality as we move forward as well. I just want to be cautious of that as we move forward. So please don't say more than you want to say in any questions or whatnot. So I see that people are from Edmonton, some from Toronto, some from Ottawa. Welcome to all of you, Toronto, Ottawa, and Edmonton so far. And you did a program in Australia, so fantastic. And at different stages of the process. So I'm glad to see it. And one of the things that I'll say for you right now, for all of you right now, if you have very specific questions that are very particular to your scenario, we may not cover that in the broad discussion, but I do want you to know that I'll give you my email afterwards and we'll move forward. I see people here from Mumbai, so welcome. Co-founded a firm. That is fantastic for creators and influencers. I love that. Shivani, thank you for letting us know. And Anissa, hello to you. So let's get started. One of the things that I always start off with, and it's important, you may have already heard this, you may know this, but I want us all to be on the very same page. And that is understanding that the process is a two-sided process. There's the accreditation stage and there's the licensing stage. And I say this because oftentimes I'm speaking with ITLs, internationally trained lawyers or students, and they meld the two together. They're very, very separate and unique processes. The accreditation phase through the National Committee of Accreditation, the NCA, which all of you I'm sure either know or will get to know very well. The NCA takes your previous education, your previous legal education, and your previous legal experience and considers what is necessary to have it become the equivalent of a Canadian common law degree. And I wanted to confirm I'm very specific about common law degree, because if anybody out there is either live or watching later is coming to this process with a civil degree, it's a bit of a separate process for you. There's additional requirements that would have to be considered if you wanted to be ultimately called to the bar in one of our common law jurisdictions, which is most of the jurisdictions in Canada. So accreditation is step one. We'll spend some time on that. Licensing is the next phase. So once the NCA indicates that you are the equivalent of a Canadian law school graduate, then you move on to the licensing process. And even though I say then, there's some things that you'll need to do beforehand. But the licensing process is what gives every graduate of a Canadian law school or NCA candidate the opportunity to practice law in that province. And I'm very mindful. I see most people here are from Ontario. I see, as I say that, I do see somebody from Calgary. So welcome to Adela from Calgary. I'm going to give you information about most of the generally about the provinces, but understand that lawyer licensing is very specific province to province. And so what we say about Ontario might be slightly different in Alberta, might be slightly different in British Columbia, might be slightly different in the provinces out east as well. So be mindful of where you want to ultimately get licensed. There is the ability to transfer from one province to another province after licensing, but I want us to all be grounded in that first stage. So accreditation, number one, licensing, number two. We're going to talk about both of those as we move forward. And that's why it was interesting to see where people are in the stage specifically. If it's repeating something for you, please hold on and bear with us. We'll get to the part that you're at in a moment. But let's start with the accreditation phase, just as a reminder, or maybe just as information for everybody. And feel free to add comments about, if you've already gone through the accreditation stage, your process and your experience with the process. So as I said, the accreditation process really involves three parts. One is the application to the National Committee of Accreditation. The other is the assessment, their assessment of your experience, your previous experience. And the third thing is the elements of the what you'll do to qualify for the NCA. Your ultimate goal when you're looking at the NCA is a certificate of qualification. People who have their CQs, congratulations to you, but the CQ, certificate of qualification, is the goal in that very first stage. You want to be able to apply, get assessed, and then you have to actually go through the process of delivering whatever requirements you have so that you can get your CQ. As I mentioned earlier, and I want to reinforce it, the accreditation by the NCA is of common law degrees. If you've got a civil law degree, you may need to have some common law, not you may, you will need to get some common law experience or education before the NCA will even review your file. Typically, and I'm going to share some screens with you. Typically, if you haven't already gone to it, and I'm going to include these links later on in an email that I send out to everybody. But the first landing page is the NCA landing page, and you would be looking at lawyer trained outside of Canada. This is where you start from. This is your starting point. Typically, the expectations from the National Committee, once it reviews your education, your practice, your legal practice from wherever you might be coming in from, it will then give you an assessment. Typically, and I'm going to switch slides, and I'm hoping that people will see this. Give me a hands up or let me know that you're not seeing a new slide. The typical exams that are required as a minimum: Canadian administrative law, Canadian constitutional law, Canadian criminal law, foundations of Canadian law, Canadian professional responsibility, and since 2022, there's also a requirement for a legal research and writing module with an organization called CPLED that I'll get to as well. These are the minimum. In the chat, it'll be useful to see if people have had more, depending on your experience, depending on the school that you went to, the grades that you had, the practice that you did. You may be asked to do more than these. So these are the minimum requirements. You will potentially be asked to do more than these. As I said, the legal research and writing is a new requirement, and I'm so glad to see that this was implemented because I've worked with ITLs across the board for many years, and legal research and writing is something that they often struggle with because it's done very differently in various jurisdictions. So having these exams plus the course in legal research and writing is a very useful item. Now, how do you complete these requirements? There's a few ways that you would complete the requirements. And let me just check to see if anybody has indicated in the chat. No, so I'm just curious if people have done their exams and their comments. So one way to do them is through self-study and participating in writing the exams. So that's one way that a number of people do it. As you've seen in the chat, another way is to register for and complete satisfactorily a Master's of Law in Canadian Common Law. There's a few universities that offer that. So University of Toronto has the GPLLM. Osgoode Hall Law School has the LLM in Canadian law. And there are a couple of schools out west as well in BC that offer a Canadian Common Law degree as well. What does that do? Instead of taking the NCA exams, you complete a master's program. You need to weigh out cost, timing, ability to self-study versus being part of a group. It's really important to think about how you work best as you're thinking about which option you will take. A third option, so self-study, LLM, a third option that some people do, and civil law graduates will oftentimes consider, is actually starting the law school process from the beginning here in Canada. Now, some common law graduates have also said to me, you know, I finished my degree in another jurisdiction. I want to get the full experience of a 3-year JD here in Canada, so I will register for a Juris Doctorate, which is the degree here. You don't need to go through the NCA for that process, but there is a separate requirement in terms of law school admission test, applications to the schools. There are different cost considerations, and it will take you 3 years to complete the degree. But before that, it's about 1 or 2 years of preparation and application. So think about that as an option. Whether it's viable for you really depends on your personal circumstances. Any comments about the exams would be really welcome in the chat. The one thing that I want people to understand is that the examinations that are provided by the NCA are fact-based exams. So some of you either have been away from law school for a long time, or others of you, when you were in law school, you didn't do fact-based exams. It was either multiple choice or short answers. And so fact-based exams are a unique way of preparing and understanding and learning the law. There are syllabi on the NCA website. There are different prep courses or materials that you might want to look at. And if you're doing it by yourself, what I would recommend is please ensure you reach out. There's various organizations, and I'll have a link of those in my email to you. Reach out and connect with others. You might study on your own, but being able to talk about the courses, the exams, the materials that you're looking at, because there are books that are recommended for the exams, is really critical. And then doing practice exams is going to be so very important. Writing fact-based exams, and the NCA does have links to support your preparation for that, but it's a unique tool. And for some of you, you've just not done it for a while. So think about the timing that you need for fact-based exams and understand the process with regards to the NCA. If you're doing an application to an LLM and you're going to try and do all of your exams through the LLM, or the majority, because sometimes people will do an LLM, but there are still a couple of exams outside of those 5 that we talked about that they will need to do with the NCA. Think about the timing again. Some of the benefits from being in an LLM is that you have formal instruction about a course. You might not have to do a full exam. Rather, there might be papers and other presentations as part of the component of completion for some of the courses. And you'll have a cohort. You'll have people and that community that we talked about around you that is so very important as an internationally trained lawyer is going through the process. So when we talk about, and I want to share one more screen with you in terms of the calendar. The NCA exams are on a very specific, strict schedule. They have specific dates, and when you're looking at it, you've got to think about what else you're doing in your life and how that will coincide with the dates that are available. And so if you look at 2024, for example, you'll be able to see that their schedule includes information about it, but then it includes very specific dates. And they're typically around this time, November, December. It goes through January, February. Not all exams are offered at all times, and there's some that are morning, some are afternoon. So once you get that first stage of your application in, and then you go through the assessment, if you're choosing to do exams, you'll understand the timing that you need. I'd really welcome people's input who've done the exams as to how much time you took to prepare for the exams. Don't underestimate, especially if you are relocating to some people will write from their home jurisdiction, but if you're relocating and you're trying to get used to a subway system in the city, if you're trying to get used to finding your way from where you live to where you might be working full-time or part-time, if you have children that are in school or other people that you're caring for, those will all factor in to the timing that you need to give for the exams. Let's move to licensing. As we said, accreditation was the first question. The first part. If there's any questions or comments, feel free to add in the chat. The second part is licensing. And I'm going to focus for the time being very briefly on the licensing process in Ontario. There are different processes for other jurisdictions, but let's take a look very briefly. The one element that I wanted to, or the one place that I'm going to focus on, but I'll come to a couple of the other places as well, is Ontario. And Ontario is regulated by the Law Society of Ontario, so LSO. I'm throwing all these acronyms to you, LSO, Law Society of Ontario. And there are three components to the LSO's licensing requirements. So the first part, you've got to ensure that you have the educational component, either because you're a graduate of a Canadian law school, or you are have received your CQ, your certificate of qualification from the National Committee of Accreditation. But the parts that you'll need to understand are the examinations, so another set of exams, the experiential piece, and then the good character requirement. Those are three elements that I want to just speak on briefly with regards to that second piece. So again, we've got the timing for the first piece, your accreditation. Now we're looking at the second piece. One of the things I will say, and this is where I talked about the overlap, you could be and you should be registering to the licensing process in Ontario or one of the other provinces as you are completing your NCA exam. So typically, I'll give you the example, the LSO opens up its licensing process for the year early in the new year. So in January, December or January. You can apply at any time, but there's certain deadlines during that time period. Even if you have just completed your final exam, or if you're almost completing your LLM, still register and at least open up the file. You have a certain amount of time from application and registration to the LSO until the completion. It's about 3 years typically, but you at least will get yourself into the licensing process. So don't wait until you have all of your CQ requirements done to apply for them licensing. Have it done at the same time. And that's the part that sometimes really, this and one other thing that I'll talk about that really can overwhelm people is the multiple things that you are juggling. And I recognize that, and that's why I'm glad that you're here for this information session. The parts to it, just to give you an overview. And for any of you who have already done the licensing process, let us know again your thoughts on the experience that you've had in the process as well. The licensing exam. So unlike the fact-based exams that we talked about for the NCA, the licensing examinations, and you'll sometimes hear them called the bar exams. That's a very colloquial way of looking at it as the bar exams. Frankly, there are two licensing exams. The correct language is licensing exams. There's a barrister licensing exam and the solicitor licensing exams. And they're offered at different times. There's information about this online. It's an open book exam, and don't underestimate the challenge of these open book exams. They're on two separate days, typically with about 2 weeks apart. And don't feel like you have to rush and do both of these two exams in that same time period, so within 2 weeks of each other. Many, many candidates will separate the one exam. They'll do the barrister exam first and the solicitor exam second at another time. So either in June and November, for example. It's really important to think about and to plan, again, just like with the NCA exams. Plan your time, plan your life, truly give enough time for yourself to get the study time that you need. And the open book exam is very, very different. It's a multiple choice exam. And I know that many internationally trained lawyers have never done multiple choice exams. So having to change your mindset from fact-based exams to multiple choice exams in a very tight, constrained time period is something that you need to wrap your mind around. So again, talk to people, practice. There are various practice exams and practice questions online that you can look at. There are various training sessions that are available that are fabulous training sessions. Speak to people, build your network so that you can feel as comfortable as you need to for these examinations. Right now you may not be familiar with what people are talking about when they say, "Oh, I've had to do my summary. Do I get a good summary or not from people? And what does it mean? How do I prepare for these?" Really, there's a lot of substantive information. The first one on the barrister materials, second one on the solicitor materials. You'll receive those pieces of information. You cannot remember everything. And if you have come from a jurisdiction, my background is Greek, and many times a lot of the way that Greeks are educated is to learn things rotely. That won't necessarily work if you're trying to figure out where things are at in a very condensed time period. So the licensing exams, they're doable. You may not pass on the first attempt, and that's okay. Don't feel bad if you have to write one or both a second time. There's certain cap of how many times you can write, but learn from each experience that you go through. That's the examination. The experiential training part is the second part of licensing, and that is where you get hands-on experience or exposure. And the two ways in particular, if you're not going through a JD program from scratch, the two ways that you'd be able to complete your experiential training is either for articling, and right now it's between 8 and 10 months of actually working for an organization, or through the law practice program. And I love the law practice program. I was the director of the law practice program for many years, but it's not for everybody. And you've got to think about what the LPP is. So the LPP offers you 8 months, where for the first half or 4 months, you're working in a simulation of a private practice firm. You're practicing in various files, they're simulation files with actors who are clients, with your mentors, and within a team environment of a firm with you and your colleagues. And you're practicing. You're getting the opportunity to try to do the work that you would otherwise do in an articling opportunity. And then in the second half, you actually get a placement in an employer's office. So you have those 8 months done a little bit differently. The first part is all virtually. So when you think about articling or LPP, consider what your needs are and what the requirements are. We're moving into a very challenging time now in terms of some employers are 5 days in person, others are all remote, and some are hybrid. So think about what your needs are, what the expectation is. It's a full-time commitment. So keep that in mind as you move forward. The good character requirement, I do not want to miss it. And people sometimes forget that this is part of the licensing process as well. And you are expected to submit information about being of good character. And there are a number of questions and I always get it wrong, if it's speeding tickets or parking tickets, to have you had any other challenges against you? And you've got to attest to this and have it confirmed. And so it is something that you want to keep in mind. I cannot underestimate, we'll talk about it a little bit later. I cannot underemphasize the importance that the Law Society offers on the rules of professional conduct. And I've spoken to many internationally trained lawyers who tell me the emphasis on professional conduct and ethics in Ontario and in other Canadian provinces is very, very different than what they may have experienced as they were going through school at a previous time or in a different jurisdiction. So please be aware of the importance of ethics and professionalism as you're moving through the process. I've talked about the law side of Ontario. I do want to raise two additional areas with you just so that you are aware as well. And I'm going to share my screen briefly so that you have this information. In a number of jurisdictions, particularly out west, but not only, there is also what we know as the CPLED, the Canadian Centre for Professional Legal Education, and the Practice Readiness Education. And so in some of the jurisdictions, you are expected to complete this program as part of the licensing process. So depending on which province you're in, you may be required to complete the prep as part of your licensing process. And for anybody who might be watching now or watching later from BC, again, a very similar 9 months of articling, 10-week of a professional legal training course, and then 2 qualification-based exams. So oftentimes people will say to me, which province should I apply to? I don't like multiple choice exams. Should I do the CPLED instead? There's always going to be something that you're engaging in, some form of an assessment, some form of an evaluation. So really try and base your decision of where to practice with other issues. Where do you have a family or other supports potentially? Where do you actually want to live? Where do you see yourself building your career? And I'm going to come to that in a moment as well in terms of the career. Let me just pause because this first part in terms of accreditation and licensing, I understand can be overwhelming. So I want to take a look to see if there are either any questions or if there's any comments on licensing or accreditation so far. Any questions in the chat? I don't see any. I'll just give a second and we'll continue on. If you have questions at the end, happy to take them at the end. So when I talk about learning the legal landscape, licensing and accreditation are one element. The next part that I want you to all become familiar with and to really be thinking about are employment opportunities. And so when we talk about employment opportunities, I want to just give a very broad consideration of what working as a lawyer may look like. One of the things to keep in mind, which is different from other jurisdictions, when you're called to the bar in Canada, in any of the provinces, you're called to the bar as both a barrister, so one who typically attends to court and is more of an advocate, and that could be in a number of different areas: family law, criminal law, general civil litigation, commercial litigation, estate litigation, tax litigation. But a barrister is something that you are eligible to engage in the work of, but also as a solicitor. You're both a barrister and a solicitor. So you may choose instead, or as well as, to work in wills and estates or in real estate or in mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes the funny aspect of being called to the bar in Canada is that you can supposedly do anything from murders to mergers and acquisition and everything in between. The reality is you probably don't want to, and it would be very, very ill-advised to even consider doing it all. You'll find what you want to do, and maybe that is the same as you've been doing previously, or maybe you're going to find this opportunity to switch and to be able to come in and do something new in your new experience, in your new chapter. So and thank you, Shivani, I do want to talk about the application, so about articling. I'll come back to that in a second. So thank you for the question. Let's just think about what those possibilities might be broadly, and I don't mean just for articling or for your LPP placement. I mean broadly. What does being a lawyer here in Canada look like? A few of the things that you want to consider are the following. So first of all, we have private practice. So private practice means that you're actually working with individual clients, with various clients. And private practice can mean you are working in a big city. It could mean that you are working in a small town, in a small community. It could mean that you are working for a firm that is 1,000 or more in size of lawyers, or it could mean sole practice, just you, maybe with some supports, or it could be in a firm that is anywhere from 2 to 1,000 people plus. So private practice has a really large scope when we say private practice, but it does mean that you are dealing individually with clients. I'd love to hear from individuals what kinds of law and what types of uh, um, circumstances or opportunities they were working in previously. So it's really helpful if you have that information. In-house is another area. And some of you have already been in-house and you understand the concept, and others may not realize that this is an opportunity. Organizations, typically large organizations, but not only. I've seen smaller companies decide to open up an in-house department of one or of two people, two lawyers, because they just don't want to be referring work out all the time. So rather than, or perhaps as a additional opportunity for an organization, they will hire and create an in-house department. I was speaking with somebody yesterday, for example, who is just starting the in-house department at Cooperators, an insurance company. They never had a legal department in the litigation part. They had it for their business side, but not for their litigation department. They looked at it and said, you know, we have a lot of volume. We want to create an in-house litigation team as well. And that's the thinking that many business corporations will do. And so in-house roles are something that are very possible as well. There, I want to say the following. I oftentimes hear people say, in-house is a lot easier. In-house is less busy than private practice. And as well as my next option, which I'll talk to in a second. And I want to say the following. Professional work is professional work. Professional work can be busy, there can be peaks and valleys, and it also depends very much on what you want to do and how you want to carve out your own professional and personal life. You will be able to have as busy a life as possible work-wise, whether you're in private practice, whether you're in-house, or the other option of whether you're in government. And so when I hear people say, oh, it's always busy in private practice, especially at the large firms, it may be busier, it might be, but I also know there's a lot of in-house lawyers who work quite a bit as well. I know private practitioners who've decided to leave at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock and be with their children. Sometimes they'll log back on afterwards and other times they won't. I know lawyers across different areas who will work on weekends and others who've said, I am not working weekends. Part of that is the employer culture, and part of that is your own what you want to how you want to carve out the life that you want, professional and personal as well. So government was the third one that I said, and I don't know if anybody has that experience previously, but here in Canada, you have the opportunity to work in law on a municipal level, on a provincial level, or on a federal level. There are lawyers and legal departments in all three of those levels. There are tremendously talented people working for various municipalities across Canada, and their work is a combination. Some of them will be doing litigation work. Others will be doing more solicitor focused work. And think about a municipality. They're building and buying buildings. They are building them and creating roads. They're creating infrastructure. They are engaged with transactions with providers. And so there's always work that municipalities, province, and feds will need in terms of the opportunities to engage legal talent. There are also other opportunities that may or may not need you to have gone through the licensing process where you could potentially, and I should have started that at the very beginning. I'm assuming people here want to go through the accreditation and the licensing process and get called to the bar. And then what you choose to do may or may not be among the three things that we talked about. You may decide not to practice and work in something else. I practiced for 4 years and then I went into legal education before I moved into career coaching. And so you can do a number of different things with your legal degree, both your original legal degree and then the accreditation and licensing here. That doesn't necessarily require the private practice route or the practice route necessarily. What do you do in the interim? And I have spoken with hundreds, if not thousands, of lawyers from other jurisdictions who say to me, I'm going through the process now, whether it's the accreditation process or the licensing process. I need a survival job. I need to work. What do I need to do? And this is where I want you to think about what your experiences are, what your needs are. There is no job that is not worth a job. anything that you do to be able to feed your family, feed yourself, and build in your cultural skills, your language skills is really, really critical. I always get asked, do I need to work in a law firm? Should I look at being a law clerk or a paralegal? And my answer is not necessarily. Build your network, build your knowledge, as we've talked about, but you don't necessarily only have to do that by working in a legal environment. If you have a gap in your language skills, for example, work somewhere where you can practice speaking, practice writing, not necessarily in a legal environment. If you can get a really great job close to home in a particular industry or an office that will allow you to study and spend time studying for your exams, fantastic, do that. It does not need to be in a legal environment necessarily. Let me just talk about two things that have come up in terms of articling, because I want to reinforce the articling timing for foreign trained lawyers, for internationally trained lawyers. The process that I described about licensing, and one of the things I will show this one, you've got today and your ultimate goal. Understanding what the timeline is and understanding that timeline may move and may change is really, really critical. The LSO has specific dates. The Law Society of Ontario has specific dates, typically 3 cycles to go through the exams and the application. CPLED information again in 4 provinces. In BC, you've got different timing. NCA exams start and finish at different times. LLMs start and finish at different times. In Ontario and many other jurisdictions, the application process for articling is a year in advance. So I'm going to show you the dates just so that we could all be on the same page in terms of the articling process. As an example, if you wanted to start articling in 2025, so what I'm showing here, I'm sorry for scrolling, 2025-26 articling recruitment process. The dates, earliest application, so you can't apply earlier than June, but it's of 2024. It's the earliest that you can apply. Many of your colleagues who are third-year students will be doing this in June of 2024 to apply for a position for the following year. So there's this very specific, in Ontario, there's a very specific schedule in terms of when you can apply, when you hear back. So call day is when the firms will call you to tell you that they are inviting you to an interview, when the interview week will be, and then when the offer day is for a job for the following year. Now, keep in mind, this chart is the beginning of the process. Of course, there are positions that come available afterwards, but if you know and understand that a lot of the positions are considered a year in advance, and if you can fit yourself into that position, into that timing, it's better to do so that you're not scrambling over the next year to find a position as you get closer to that availability date for you to start. So 1 year in advance at a minimum. Here's the other thing that I'll say, at least for Ontario, but also in some of the other provinces. If you're thinking about a large firm in particular, so one of the larger Bay Street firms, and it's not the only option, I always say that just to reiterate that. There's a summer process where students who are in their just entering their second year of the 3-year degree will apply to a number of firms for a summer job between their second and third year. So before you get your NCA CQ, think about this as you being in the equivalent of a second year position, which means you may want to apply for a summer job that is the equivalent of a 2L, because the year after you'll be eligible to participate in the articling process. Why do I raise this? Some of the firms, not all, but some and many that you might be interested in, typically will hire their articling students only from the second year summer pool that they have hired. So they may not even engage in the articling position. So again, trying to keep as many options open to you as possible. If you're interested in larger corporate firms, be aware and understand the timing for summer recruits. There's a wonderful organization that has now started engaging some of these law firms to do a 2L recruit for internationally trained lawyers. happy to send that information as part of my list of information to people as we move forward. I want to pause because I know there's specific questions. I'm just going to take a quick look. When you mentioned about registering with the LSO, am I required to be in articling before in Canada before applying? So no, you don't necessarily need to be in Canada when you are applying for the licensing process. However, you do have to be in Canada when you start the process. And so ensure you A, are eligible to work here, and B, have that process in place. There's a contact there. How to apply for an articling position for in-house. So where and when to apply. And this is where information is so important. As I mentioned, each of the schools, each of the law schools, to help their third-year students or their second-year summer students, has guidebooks and books on how to apply or where to apply, and firms will participate through a particular portal to accept the applications. You don't have that available necessarily. And so in terms of and you just reminded me of a potential really great resource that we could be looking at to help articling students, ITLs with articling students. So thank you for that, Akansha. But again, government positions, the federal government and the Department of Justice and the provincial Ontario OPS, the Ontario Public Service, oftentimes will list their information on their websites, on their two respective websites. So that's a starting point for you to be able to look at. In-house positions, through the law practice program, more in-house positions started taking students for placements. Not a lot of in-house positions for articling students necessarily. Many people still believe, and I have conversations with this, there are two sides of every discussion, but there are a number of people who are in-house who say, let's get you some experience in private practice before you transition to in-house, and may not offer articling positions. So again, it is information. LinkedIn has information. I've seen postings oftentimes for articling requirements or articling students, being part of a network, and I'm going to try and think of how we can get that information in a more solid base for people going forward. The question, what advice do you have for foreign trained lawyers who have been out of practice for about a decade and got their degree 15 years ago, but would like to start the licensing process? Get as much information as you can right now. And I think it's really important to think about that right now for information. Learn about what you want to do, what you need to do, what skills you might have to build up a little bit. Really important as you move forward. So Maharshi, you said vLaw, and I'm really glad to see that. However, how do you access vLaw if you're not part of a school or a program? That's one of the things to keep in mind. I saw somebody put up your hand, and maybe it was Maharshi, and that's what you were wanting to contribute. Was there a person who put up their hand who has a question at this point, or was it Maharshi?
Hi, Gina. It was me. It's Katerina.
Hi, yes, hi there.
My question was with regards to articling, which is usually happening 1 year ahead of time. And I was that student who missed that 1 year ahead. Because I'm from civil law jurisdiction, I'm from Russia, and it was just not in my head that I'm supposed to be looking for articling 1 year ahead, and no one warned me about it. So I was caught up in this period of looking for articling position when I've already received my NCA certificate. And I found it. And unfortunately, the placement that I got when I've been hired, it was the placement of psychological harassment when I've been experiencing a lot, and I had to quit. So I wanted to ask, is there any exception to the rule, to this 1 year ahead, with big law firms, with like smaller firms in particular? Because sometimes the placement where you start is not necessarily where you want to continue. And unfortunately, a lot of smaller firms, they suggest really hostile environment. And I know I'm not the only one who's telling you this. So therefore, I wanted to ask if there are any exception for people like me. For instance, I quit articling, although it was not really advisable, right? Because it's really hard to find any articling position, and a lot of people, they try to stick with it, notwithstanding whatever you're facing in this work environment. And I couldn't, unfortunately, continue. I think fortunately, because it just was above and beyond of my understanding of what legal profession is about.
Katerina, first of all, I want to acknowledge nobody should have to deal with such toxicity and harassment and abuse in a workplace. So I want to recognize that. And the Law Society actually sends out information about that. Remember, we're talking about lawyers who are supposed to know the rules of professional conduct. So I want to acknowledge the experience that you had. There are two things that you said that I want to just bring into the conversation. So one, it's why I try and have these sessions for ITLs. The sooner you can think about the process and again, plan out the timing, the more opportunities and options that you do have. So it's not impossible. You can still, you will, not you can, you will still be able to complete your articling requirements. But for those who are somewhere else ahead of the process, keep Katerina's story in mind. Many opportunities come up after the one, the between the year that, or between the time when it's the 1 year before and when you want to start. But it might not be the options that you want necessarily. So to increase your pool of options, that's why I say know when the articling dates are for your jurisdiction, and perhaps know when your summer applications are so that you can move into those possibilities to create that expanded network. There are still many opportunities, and I would really encourage you, happy to talk separately and offline, but there are opportunities for people. So the next part that I wanted to say is one of the options with the Law Society in Ontario and other options with other provinces as well is you could waive that experiential piece. You could, based on your experience, if you're from a civil jurisdiction, no, you need to have common law experience, but you could waive the articling or LPP requirement. However, you need to get information from your previous bosses, your previous employers that show they want you to match the experiential requirements in Ontario, for example, with what you've done before. So somebody has to fill out what you used to do, what you learned from it, what you engaged in. A minimum, they say, of 1 year of employment experience in common law jurisdiction. There are pros and cons to asking for a waiver. Among the biggest of the cons is that if you know that you want to start out on your own and perhaps you have the experience and the network to do so. Katerina, I've just muted you just in case. Sorry, but you can come on board again after. Then I would say if you have your own network and you're pretty confident that you're going to be opening up your own office afterwards, great, consider the waiver. If you don't, however, being able to see and work with and understand what another organization is doing and how to practice in Ontario or in a Canadian jurisdiction, there is a benefit to it. So I oftentimes have this conversation with people who've been practicing 15, 20 years, judges in their home jurisdictions, and they say, why should I go through the process of starting from scratch? And that is something that I want to talk about as well, because that is, I realize the challenge that might come from it. And starting from scratch is really a huge request to ask people, but it really is important to think about, are you going to need and benefit from being in a workplace? Now, you don't have to be in the same workplace. The Law Society takes this into account. There are reasons why people start and stop different places, whether it is the situation that you found yourself in, Katerina, or whether it is for health purposes. So you have a certain time, I said 3 years before, to complete your licensing requirements, the exams and your experiential piece. You could do 3 months at one place, and as long as you've gotten confirmation from that former employer that you met the requirements, and hoping that there's no challenge on that, then you'll have to find a place of employment for 6 months or 7 months, if you, depending on what the timing is. So it's not unusual for people to try and have differing opportunities. And on the same front, I want to also say the following for people. Articling typically is an 8 to 10 month requirement. If you have a medical condition or a mental health condition or other reasons why you can't actually do full time, consider searching. It's not easy, but it is possible to find an employer who might be willing to stretch that so that you can complete your requirements over a longer period of time, half time, so that you're working part time or half time and still completing the requirements, but over a longer period of time. So there's various ways to get creative and think about what your circumstances are. I want to think on that part about what you need to do to plan ahead. So first and foremost, this is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Don't try and cross that finish line fast to do it all, finish all your exams, all your LLM requirements, get that job, move forward. Take your time, pace it. I know that many of you have been practicing elsewhere. You might be of an age where you think, I don't want to have to take this for another 3 or 4 years. Pace yourself. Think about the long-term goal, not the short-term goal only. So give yourself that space and pace. Remember the dates, or if you don't know them, look up the dates for the NCA exams, for licensing applications, put them in your calendars. Actually start using your calendars to your benefit as your best friend. Put them in your calendars and put timelines 2 months ahead of there so you can remind yourself of those dates. Understand and look at the licensing exams, have those in your calendars if you want. So you think about, can I do this? Can I not do this at the moment? Coping with failure and disappointment. All of you are hugely talented. All of you have had wonderful careers beforehand. All of you are very capable. And you might find that you have some disappointments. Employers who don't respond, jobs that you don't get, licensing exams or accreditation exams that you might fail. How do you cope with that potential disappointment and failure? It's not unusual. It's not impossible. It doesn't frame you as a failure. You perhaps failed an exam or perhaps didn't get the job that you were hoping for. We've all had failures. I have failed in getting jobs that I wanted or clients that I wanted. And so I want you to think about what you need to do to support yourself and to be compassionate with yourself when those disappointments come out. Especially, and I applaud everybody who makes that huge decision to move to another jurisdiction and then makes the further decision to go ahead and get accredited and licensed in that other jurisdiction. Those steps alone are huge. When you factor on all the other things that happen, give yourself the compassion, the understanding, and the opportunity to know you're doing well and get the supports that you need, whether it's supports from a network for the exams. There's great opportunities. There's something called the Ontario Bar Boot Camp that is fabulous. There are guides available in terms of prepping for some of the exams. There are communities and there are courses that are available as well if you need support. But even just finding one person, and I respect who was it? Akanshka, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. I am so sorry for that. But I love the fact that you put in your LinkedIn. This is a chance for everybody to make one more contact to help and support and be there for you as a community in terms of your journey. I don't know if anybody knows Robin Sharma, but there is a leadership coach who is internationally well known. He's written a number of books. Two of them that come to my mind. The first one that he did was The Monk Who Sold His Ferrari. A recent one that he did was The 5 a.m. Club. I'm not a big 5 a.m. fan, but I love some of his ideas. And the one thing that and he's also a lawyer, but a former lawyer from Canada who is now working internationally. One quote that he had that always comes to me is this one here. And if you can't see it, I'm going to read it out to you because you're all dealing with change right now. All change is hard at first, messy in the middle, and gorgeous at the end. What you're experiencing is complete change to everything. And your stomach is going to feel in knots. Your head's going to feel overwhelmed. Understand that's part of the learning and change process. You'll get to a part where it's a little bit less messy, and you'll get to a part where you've succeeded and made all the changes that you need as you move forward with things. So please keep that in mind as you think about it. Get comfortable with discomfort. I say it, and I'm not great at it, but I'm trying to get even better with it. Here's a couple of things that you can do just as you're putting everything else in mind. When you go home, if you're walking home from somewhere, try taking a different route. If you want, try writing with the other hand for a couple of minutes. Try getting uncomfortable. Try dealing with change so that you can train your brain to understand discomfort is temporary. I will get through this. I've gotten through this before. I'll be able to get through this as well. Do the little exercises that can help challenge your mind about change and move forward with it. I get ready for those feelings, learn to accept them and to live with them and not push through them right away. We all want to get things done and get things done really quickly. I've got 5 minutes and I just want to say one more thing because I think I wanted to give this landscape and ensure we start the community, but there's a couple of things in terms of preparing yourself. So you may not be at that stage, or you may be thinking about articling. A couple of things to understand. First of all, you cannot start writing a cover letter or a resume, which are required for most opportunities here, unless you understand yourself, unless you understand what your strengths are, unless you understand what work you have done in the past, and unless you understand your definition of success. What does success mean to you? What is it going to look like? Where are your goals? And success may be very short term or very long term, but understand what it means to you. What is it? Why do you want it? Write it down. Have it somewhere. And then with your resume, I'm going to do a couple of on my YouTube channel. I'm going to have a couple of sessions on resume writing and interviewing. And I would really encourage you to subscribe to the YouTube channel so you can get those as you move forward. But with resume writing, some of you have never done a resume, or others of you have never done a resume that is required for a legal market here in Ontario or in Canada. There's some things that are sort of foundational and fundamental. And I really would encourage you to think about what it looks like. No more than 2 pages. So even if you've got 17, 18, 20 years of experience, no more than 2 pages. I'm going to give you some very broad strokes. You shouldn't see the words I or my, no personal words. What you do want to see are bullets that highlight the strengths and the activities that you've done. So verbs that highlight the things that you've done are critical. There's some other requirements, and I'm going to leave it for the YouTube channel, but just know that there's an art and a technique to writing a resume and a cover letter that you might not be familiar with. So get somebody to look at it, get somebody to check it out for you. Look at precedents and look at other ways of writing. I'm going to send you a link to one that I really love and that I think is useful for everybody. Cover letter should be no more than 1 page, no more than 1 page, and it follows a very, very specific format. Tell them, first of all, there's the intro, but the intro would be tell them why you want to work with them. What is it about their organization? So yes, personalization. Tell them 2 paragraphs of your strengths related to your experience, related to your past jobs, your education, and then reinforce why you would be good for their organization. 4 paragraphs, no more than that, but you do need some other parts above and below it. And we'll talk about that during a YouTube channel. The other thing that some employers might ask for, and you want to turn your mind to, a writing sample. So if you're not in an LLM, where can you get a professional writing sample? Do you have something from work that you've done before? Confidential, of course, and with no name shown, but you might want to turn your mind to what kind of a writing sample you might be asked to provide. And interviewing is a whole other ball game that we can talk about. But one of the things that I want to stress right now, none of you is alone. You have each other, you have me, you have members in other groups. I really want you to think about how you can build your network. For many people, talking about yourselves in a positive light is not something that comes naturally. Culturally, there might be reasons why you don't want to highlight your strengths. It's something that is expected and is done here, and you want to practice it. And practice it with people that are near and dear to you and that you trust initially, and then practice it with a stranger that you're introduced to. One little tip I always tell people when they're building their network, for every person that you meet, end the meeting by saying, "This has been a fabulous meeting. Thank you so much. Are there 1 or 2 other people that you think I'd benefit speaking with?" Build your network one person at a time. You've got many people here that you can build your network with as well. And the last thing that I want to say as we wrap up, and I'm very mindful of the time, there are a number of different networks in the across Canada, the ITL network, the ITL NCA, the NCA network, Global Lawyers of Canada, as well. There's a number of affinity groups. So if you haven't heard of any of these, look them up. The Canadian Association for Black Lawyers, the Hispanic Law Association, the Hellenic Lawyers Association, the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers, the South Asian Bar Association. We all have acronyms, SABA, FACL, CABLE, HCLA, Hellenic Lawyers Association. Look onto their websites. Look at who their directors are. Reach out to people who you think might have shared in your journey and who you might feel a resonance with. Sign up for their newsletters. go to their events. Again, building your professional network so you can get as much information and as much exposure as you need is really important. I'm going to put in an email to everybody who's joined, I'm going to put in my email. You have it, gina.alexandris9@gmail.com. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Join me on LinkedIn at any time. And again, sign up for my YouTube channel. I'm going to share that with you in the email that I send to you with all the other links. Let me just pause and see if there's any. We have a couple of minutes. I know I said 1 o'clock, so if people need to sign off, please feel free to do so. I want to be mindful of the time. But any questions that come up, and I'm just going to read in the chat very quickly. TLA, CBA, sub-associations. Yes, great idea. So Shivani, a couple of groups that I didn't talk about, and these are, there's the Toronto Lawyers Association is local. If you live in Pickering, or if you live in Mississauga, there are local associations as well that are fabulous. I do some work with the Peel Region Law Association, for example, as well. And so there are local associations. Same thing that I said, look up their directors, sign up for their newsletters, go to their events, stay connected with them. And the Canadian Bar Association does have subgroups. What I oftentimes tell people to do, look on the Canadian Bar Association, look under their groups, and as we talked about with the other groups, find out who the directors are. See what their newsletter has said recently. The Canadian Bar Association does have a fee. All of these have fees. So you may have to pick and choose. What do I want to do for free? Get onto their newsletter. Typically that's for free. You may very well want to choose 1 or 2 that you will pay to join. And I'll say there are also other groups, the Women's Law Association. There's associations for LGBTQ. There's associations for Indigenous lawyers. There's associations for a variety of different groups. Please feel free to participate in those. Not feel free. Actively engage in those activities. The more information you know, the bigger your network, the better off that you will be. Last check to see if there's any other questions. Stay forward for the resume and interview prep sessions. I'm glad about that. Any other questions or comments, folks? Seeing none, I'm going to close the session with tremendous thanks to all of you for participating. I hope this has been helpful, and I hope to see you and hear from you again in the future. Have a great afternoon. Bye, everyone.